The 4th of July weekend always drew me to the coastal house I had owned for 20 years. It was my quiet sanctuary, a place where the rhythmic crashing of the waves leveled my thoughts and the salty breeze cleared my lungs. I pulled my sedan into the driveway, expecting nothing but the familiar scent of pine and ocean. Instead, the sight before me stopped my breath. 4 unfamiliar SUVs were parked haphazardly on the front lawn, their heavy tires carving deep ruts into the grass I had carefully seeded last fall. Loud pop music vibrated through the open windows of my living room. Wet beach towels were draped over my vintage wicker chairs, already leaving water stains on the cushions. It didn't look like my peaceful retreat anymore. It resembled a crowded frat house. I grabbed my small duffel bag and walked up the sandy path, my keys jingling softly in my hand. Before I could even insert my key into the lock, the screen door pushed open. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, stood in the doorway. She was wearing my floral gardening apron over her swimsuit, holding a plastic cup filled with a bright red drink. Her friends crowded the kitchen island behind her, laughing loudly. When Sarah saw me, her fake hostess smile vanished, replaced by a deep scowl. She didn't bother to lower her voice as she turned to my son David, who was hiding behind the refrigerator door. "Why did that old Parasite show up here? We have no room for you." Sarah screamed, the disdain dripping from every word. The music seemed to pause. The strangers in my kitchen stared at me, their eyes scanning my simple linen blouse and travel slacks. David peeked out, looking down at his sandals, his shoulders hunched. He didn't say a single word to defend me. I didn't flush. I didn't cry. I looked at the muddy footprints on my hardwood floors, the overflowing trash bags on the porch, and then right into Sarah's glaring eyes. I smiled, though my heart was completely cold. "It's okay, dear," I replied gently. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away. But I wasn't heading home. I was heading to town. The motel room off the main highway was small, smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. I placed my bag on the worn bedspread, pulled out my laptop, and sat at the tiny desk in the corner. I had always believed in giving my children space, letting them use the beach house for their vacations, trusting they would respect the place that my late husband and I built. Today shattered that illusion. I opened my browser and logged into my bank accounts. For the past 3 years, I had maintained a joint checking account with David. It was supposed to be a convenience, a fund he could use for emergency maintenance on the beach house if a pipe burst or the roof leaked while I was back in the city. I rarely checked it, trusting him blindly. My eyes narrowed at the screen. The balance was nearly zero. I clicked on the recent transactions. There were no plumbing invoices or hardware store receipts. Instead, I saw charges for high-end steakhouses, a luxury spa resort in Miami, and weekly grocery deliveries to their suburban home. Hundreds of dollars were siphoned out month after month. The money I had set aside for property taxes and upkeep was funding Sarah's lifestyle. David hadn't just been passive at the door. He had been silently stealing from me, allowing his wife to treat my life savings as their personal piggy bank. No wonder she felt entitled to call me a parasite. In her mind, this house and my money already belonged to them. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sting of betrayal wash over me. I didn't shed a tear. Tears were for mistakes you couldn't fix. I reached into my purse and pulled out my reading glasses. It was time to stop being the generous, invisible mother. I clicked the tab for account settings. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, steady and precise. If they wanted to play house, they were about to discover who actually owned the playground. By 6:30 a.m. the next morning, the coastal fog was still rolling over the highway, but I was already completely awake. I sat in the motel room with a cup of black coffee, watching the digital clock on my laptop. As soon as the bank's customer service lines opened, I made the call. Yes, I need to remove an authorized user from my checking account. I told the representative, my voice even. David Miller. Yes, immediately. Within 10 minutes, the joint account was closed. I transferred the remaining $72 into my private savings. Next, I pulled up the credit card account I had given David for house emergencies. I clicked the large red button on the screen report card, lost, stolen. The system confirmed the card was deactivated instantly. A quiet satisfaction settled in my chest. The financial tap was officially dry. Next, I opened the smart home app on my phone. 2 years ago, after a severe winter storm, I had installed a smart thermostat and a digital lock on the front door to monitor the property remotely. I tapped the screen, deleting David's access code from the system. I then reset the master PIN to something only I would know. I checked the weather app. It was going to be 90 degrees today. Sarah and her friends would undoubtedly spend the entire afternoon down at the beach, leaving the house empty. I finished my coffee and grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to barge in and yell. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum in front of her friends. I was simply going to take back what was mine, one quiet step at a time. I drove toward the beach house, knowing exactly what I needed to do before they returned from the sand. I parked my car a block away from the beach house, out of sight. Walking up the sandy path, I noticed the front yard was quiet. The SUVs were still there, but the beach chairs and umbrellas were gone. I approached the front door, entering my new PIN. The lock clicked open with a satisfying chime. Inside the house was a disaster. Empty wine bottles cluttered the countertops, and sand crunched under my shoes. I ignored the mess in the living room and walked straight upstairs to the master bedroom. This was my room. The bedspread was one I had hand-quilted. The photographs on the dresser were of my late husband. But today, Sarah's oversized suitcases were thrown across the mattress. Her expensive makeup spilled over my vanity. They had pushed my framed photos face down to make room for her hair tools. I didn't throw her belongings into the hallway. Instead, I carefully packed her clothes back into her suitcases, zipped them up, and rolled them out into the upstairs corridor. I did the same with David's bags. I wiped down my vanity, set my husband's photos upright, and smoothed the quilt. From my tote bag, I pulled out a heavy-duty combination padlock and a specialized door bracket I had purchased at the local hardware store that morning. Using a quiet electric screwdriver, I attached the bracket to the heavy oak door of the master bedroom. I stepped out into the hallway, pulled the door shut, and snapped the padlock into place. I walked downstairs, gathered my grandmother's silver cutlery from the kitchen drawers, and packed it into a padded box. I wasn't leaving anything of sentimental value where Sarah's careless friends could ruin it. Before leaving, I paused by the electrical panel in the utility room. I flipped the breaker for the hot water heater to the off position. A cold shower is wonderful after a hot day at the beach, I thought, smiling to myself. I walked out the back door, leaving the house as quiet as I found it. Back at my motel room, I opened my laptop and pulled up the security camera feed from the front porch. At 4:30 p.m., the group trudged up the walkway, their skin red from the sun, dragging coolers and sandy towels. Sarah was laughing loudly, leaning on one of her friends. David trailed behind, carrying an oversized beach umbrella. I watched the screen as Sarah approached the door and punched in their old code. The lock flashed red. She tried again, stabbing the keypad with her finger. Red again. I could see her mouth moving in frustration. She turned and yelled at David, who rushed forward looking confused. He tried the code. Denied. He pulled out his phone, presumably to check the app, only to find his access revoked. Luckily for them, one of her friends had left the side patio door unlocked. They managed to get inside. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was David. I let it ring. A few minutes after that, it buzzed again. Then a text popped up. Mom, the master bedroom door is padlocked. What is going on? Sarah's stuff is in the hallway. I took a sip of my iced tea and ignored it. 5 minutes later, another text arrived. This one more frantic. Mom, please, call me back. I just tried to order pizza for everyone and my card was declined. The bank says the account is closed. Is everything okay? I set the phone face down on the desk. They were beginning to understand the mechanics of the real world. A house doesn't clean itself. Doors don't open by magic, and money doesn't simply appear from nowhere. When you call the owner a parasite, you shouldn't be surprised when she stops acting like a host. Tomorrow, I would give them their final lesson. By the next morning, the texts from David had piled up, ranging from confusion to outright panic. Sarah had apparently tried to take a shower and discovered the water was freezing cold. They couldn't order takeout, and their friends were starting to realize something was very wrong with this free vacation house. I sat on the motel balcony, enjoying the morning breeze, and opened the internet provider's app on my phone. Sarah always boasted about her remote job, bragging that she could work from anywhere while her friends partied. I knew she had a mandatory video conference every Monday morning. I navigated to the router settings. With a single tap, I paused the Wi-Fi connection for the entire house. Almost immediately, my phone began to vibrate violently on the table. This time, it wasn't David. The caller ID flashed Sarah's name. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times in rapid succession. I listened to the voicemails while eating my toast. Hazel, the Wi-Fi is down. Her voice shrieked through the speaker, completely abandoning her usual condescending tone. I have a presentation in 10 minutes. Fix it right now, or I'm going to lose a massive client. And why is the hot water off? David said you closed the account. You can't just do this to us. I deleted the message. I couldn't do this to them. It was my internet, my water, my house. Finally, I sent a single text to David, meet me at the diner on Main Street in 20 minutes. Come alone. I grabbed my purse and walked out the door. It was time to clear the air face to face without the audience of her freeloading friends. I felt no anger, only a deep, solid clarity. The days of me staying quiet to keep the peace were over. The diner was nearly empty, filled with the smell of bacon and old coffee. I sat in a booth near the back, stirring a cup of Earl Grey tea. The bell above the door jingled, and David walked in. He looked exhausted. His hair was messy, and he was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt. He slid into the booth across from me, rubbing his temples. Mom, what are you doing? Sarah is having a complete meltdown. Her friends are packing up to leave. You embarrassed us. I embarrassed you, I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. You stood by while your wife called me an old parasite on my own front porch. You didn't say a word, David. She was just stressed, he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. She wanted this weekend to be perfect for her friends. You showing up unannounced. It threw her off. It is my house, I reminded him simply. I don't need an announcement to visit my own property. But let's talk about stress. Let's talk about the joint account. David stiffened his face, draining of color. I saw the charges, David. The spa, the steakhouses. You've been draining the maintenance fund for 3 years. I was going to pay it back, he stammered, looking at his hands. Things have just been tight lately. You don't understand how expensive it is to keep Sarah happy. That is your responsibility as her husband, not mine, I replied. I closed the accounts. The credit card is dead. The master bedroom is locked because it is mine. You and Sarah are guests who overstayed their welcome the minute you disrespected the owner. Before David could respond, the diner door swung open violently. Sarah marched in, her face red with fury, clutching her phone. She spotted us and stormed over, slapping her hands down on the table. Turn the internet back on, she demanded loudly. Keep your voice down, Sarah. I said, not looking up from my tea. I will not, she hissed, leaning over the table. You ruined my weekend. You embarrassed me in front of my friends, locked us out of the master suite, and cut off the water. You are petty and vindictive. Turn the Wi-Fi on now, or we are never speaking to you again. I finally looked up, meeting her furious gaze with absolute calm. If you don't want to speak to me, that is your choice. But you will not stand there and dictate terms regarding my property. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table. It was a printed invoice I had made at the motel. What is this? David asked, picking it up. That is the itemized list of what you took from the maintenance account over the last 3 years, I said. It totals just over $14,000. Beneath that is the standard weekly rental rate for a beachfront house on this island during a holiday weekend. Sarah scoffed. You expect us to pay you rent? You're his mother. I am the owner, I corrected her. You called me a parasite, Sarah. But a parasite is an organism that lives in or on an organism of another species and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. Looking at that bank statement, it's very clear who the parasites are. David swallowed hard. Mom, you have 2 choices, I said, folding my hands on the table. You can pay me the rental fee for this weekend and stay until tomorrow morning sleeping in the guest rooms. Or you can pack your bags and leave my property within the next hour. If you choose to stay without paying, I will simply cancel the electricity altogether. Sarah crossed her arms, glaring at David. Tell her no, David. Put her in her place. David looked at the invoice, then at his wife, and finally at me. For a moment, I saw the little boy. He used to be the one who always looked to me to fix his problems. But I couldn't fix this for him. He had chosen this life, and he had to manage it. We don't have the money for the rent, Mom, David whispered. You know my accounts are empty. Then you have 1 hour to vacate the house, I replied, picking up my purse. I slid a $5 bill onto the table for my tea. You're kicking your own son out, Sarah yelled, drawing the attention of the waitress behind the counter. You're a horrible mother. I am a mother who is finally setting a boundary, I said, standing up. I will be at the house in exactly 60 minutes to change the physical locks on the doors. Whatever is left inside after that time will be donated to the local shelter. I turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. I drove to the hardware store, purchased 2 new deadbolts, and sat in my car by the beach pavilion, watching the clock on my dashboard. Exactly 55 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway of my house. The SUVs were being loaded in a frantic rush. Sarah's friends were tossing bags into the trunks, refusing to make eye contact with me. Sarah was aggressively shoving a cooler into the back seat, muttering angrily to herself. David stood by his car door. He looked defeated. He opened his mouth to speak as I walked up the path holding my bag of new locks. But I just gave him a brief nod. Leave the spare keys on the kitchen counter, I said gently. Safe travels, David. He nodded, a look of profound shame crossing his face, and got into his car. I stood on the front lawn and watched their cars drive away, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust before disappearing down the coastal highway. The silence that fell over the property was immediate and profound. I walked into the house. The spare keys were sitting on the island counter right where I had asked. I locked the front door behind me and went straight to work. I spent the next 2 hours replacing the deadbolts on the front and back doors. I didn't need to do it. The smart locks were secure enough, but the physical act of turning the screws and setting the new brass plates felt like closing a heavy chapter of my life. After the doors were secured, I opened all the windows to let the fresh ocean breeze sweep through the rooms, chasing away the stale smell of spilled beer and cheap perfume. I gathered the wet towels, threw them in the washing machine, and swept the sand from the hardwood floors. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple, the house was mine again. It wasn't just clean. It felt completely different. It felt respected. I made myself a cup of tea and walked out onto the back deck, sinking into my favorite Adirondack chair. My phone sat on the table beside me, completely silent. I knew David and Sarah would likely not speak to me for a long time. I knew holiday dinners would be fractured. But as I listened to the steady, rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore, I realized I didn't feel guilty. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into their lives, ignoring the disrespect to maintain a fragile peace. Today, I chose my own peace. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The house was quiet. The bills were under my control, and the keys were securely in my pocket. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, entirely content to be alone.